Welcome back to CXO Revolutionaries. I'm Ben Fanning, your co-host, and today I have for you Daan Huybregts, who is the CTO of EMEA. Dan, welcome to CXO Revolutionaries.
Thank you, Ben.
Dan is from the Netherlands, as you'll find out in this episode today. Born and raised in the Netherlands, a real self-described nerd and not afraid to admit it, speaks not one, not two, but 3 different languages, and he's also a private pilot as a hobby. I mean, my gosh, man.
As a hobby.
As a hobby. I mean, can you imagine that? As just a hobby, flying around Europe. Now, let's dig in. Growing up, and we were having some pre-conversation. You grew up in a small town in the Netherlands. Did you ever think that you would be a CTO of a global company?
That's a great question, man. So first off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. So the short answer is no. As a boy, I wanted to become what every boy wants to become, either a firefighter or a pilot. So the first didn't happen. The second panned out after a long time. Because, first, if you want to become a pilot, you need 2 things, right? You need money and time. So when you're a kid, you don't have money, but you got time. Then you start working, then it's the exact other way around. You got time, but no money. And then, now I finally got to the state where I had both. So I had money and time.
Well, did you ever have any close calls as a pilot?
I had a couple whilst training, and also after I was pilot in command. A couple of engine failures after takeoff. I was like 300 feet high, so I was able to circle it back without any major incidents. Hence, we're having this conversation now.
So your plane has 1 engine.
Yes.
And it goes out.
It does.
And then what? Then how do you respond?
You've got checklists for everything. So, of course, the first time when it happens to you in real life, it's kind of a thing because you're sitting there all by yourself, but you just revert back to muscle memory. You go to your checklist, and we're having this conversation now. So it ended up okay.
You made it back. That's great. Well, the checklist thing, I think, applies probably really well to being a leader.
Yeah, it's getting your routine and your procedures down and rinse and repeat. Absolutely.
Yeah, and muscle memory.
Yes. So building on what you know, and absolutely.
So in the world of cybersecurity, when a crisis hits, which that's your business, right? I mean, yes, you can prevent issues, and that's what Zscaler is really all about ultimately, right? Is preventing the problems.
Right.
But when they do happen, seconds
matter, yeah.
Seconds matter.
Absolutely. So what I like to tell customers, adversaries only need to get it right once. You as a customer need to get it right all the time. So having a good partner to really guide you through something like that is key, right? So I think one of the main thought processes behind what we do at Zscaler is really guiding customers in that process and giving them the tools to actually act in seconds, right? If they have to.
Yeah, so do you have an example of a time when seconds mattered?
Absolutely. So we had a customer nowadays, and they reached out to us when they weren't a customer yet, and they were in a down state. So they were completely hacked, and all the systems were down. And basically, the entire operation got shut down. So they reached out to us saying, can you help? So this was a 60,000 people company, active in around 60 countries. And we got them back online in a week. So people were working after a day, so they could access basic systems. And then we had to guide them in actually, recovering data and getting systems back online.
Jeez. And so if you tallied up, I don't know if y'all did this or not, but do you tallied up how much that week cost them as an organization?
We did do the math. It was a substantial 7-figure number. Yeah, it was.
Good grief. Okay. All right. So you guys can kind of parachute in a crisis, but it's way more cost advantageous to get ready beforehand than wait for the crisis to hit.
Absolutely. So I mean, if you look at some of the principles of what we do, it's really, zero trust is around making applications go dark. So not having anything exposed, right? So if you can't get to it, you can't breach it, right? So the intent is to be in line for the majority of the traffic, if not all of the traffic, because data is key in this world, right? I can only tell you what's going to happen or make a prediction on what's going to happen based on data that I'm getting from you. So, but because we're in line, we can do a lot and kind of help with all those predictions. And, we use AI and machine learning, which is, two very popular buzzwords nowadays. But in terms of Zscaler, it's really, we have the rich data to then have an effective AI to help you out with some of those things. Yeah, absolutely.
So many important things for people to be thinking about in that. Now, I don't want to get too far off your background because I want to jump in on some of this a little bit more. So thinking back, what was your first job and how did it maybe impact your leadership journey?
It's a great question. I actually didn't start out in IT. I started out in lighting. So I did lighting for concerts and festivals. And I was having a blast.
Sounds like fun.
I was having a blast. So I think the coolest thing I did was back in the early 2000s, there was a concert called Live Aid. There were many of them. I was one of the 3 lighting guys in London for that one, which was the peak. But then at the end of the day, IT was my hobby and lighting was kind of my daytime job. And I was like, this whole internet thing is kind of interesting. So that's when I kind of made the switch. And I started my IT career at a service provider. So I started out at the help desk. I was a service desk guy. Hey, is your internet down? Call me and I'll help you out. From there, I moved on to network engineering, network architecture, then got into management roles at investment companies, also at some vendors, to then be moving to Zscaler eventually. Yeah.
So it seems like you've had courage throughout your career to make a change there and again. And man, has it gotten you to a very high level inside an organization? What's your advice to your younger self or something maybe you would have tried differently early in your career?
This is going to sound very cliche, but it worked for me. It's just dream big. Like, when I was still on the service desk, I didn't dream of becoming a CTO of a company because I didn't feel like that was in reach at all, right? But just, being good at what you do and being motivated and just telling yourself, hey, I can do this, gets you far, gets you a long way.
Wow. So thinking back in your career, when's the time you had a twist or failure that ended up leading to your success or growth on down the road?
I think it was, and this is a funny example. So this was when I was back at the service provider company, and I was moving from network engineering to kind of network architecture, and then I hit this ceiling, or like a block, right? And people told me that, hey, you've made so many moves in this last couple of years. This is kind of where we want you to be. Because I was up for a management job there, and they were actively blocking it, and that got me thinking. It was like, A, that's poor leadership skills, if you ask me, and B, that's how you get people to quit, right? And that's exactly what I did. And then I moved on to a different company and got the role that I wanted in the first place. Right now, I encourage people to do better, and I hope that they will do better, and I will never be the blocker to enable that.
Yeah, keep going and also help promote your people, help get them and help them identify the opportunity in their career. Yeah, I can see that, just being so powerful. Looking back at that moment, do you think that you might have taken a different direction if you'd been more supported internally to get to the next level?
I'm not one to hold grudges, so I'm also a firm believer that things happen for a reason, and it played out pretty well, right? So I don't really think so. I think eventually, because with every switch that somebody makes, people always make pros and cons lists in their head, right? Okay, this is what I like at this company, this is what I don't like, versus maybe at the new job as well. Like the list of cons was getting pretty big at that company, so it would have probably not panned out anyway. So
yeah, all right, well, good. Yeah, it definitely did work out.
yes.
So as we talked earlier, you're back living in a small town where you grew up, and I'm curious, what's it like working for a global organization and being a leader, but also in your day-to-day being located in a smaller town, and what do you think the world can learn from that experience?
I think the global pandemic has shown us that working from anywhere should be possible, right? And I phrase this delicately, and I use the word should, because I'm seeing many companies implement different types of strategies. There's companies that go full, hey, let's go back to work 5 days a week mode. There's companies that've got a little hybrid thing going on, and there's companies that say you can work from wherever you want as long as you get stuff done. So to answer your question, I'm a strong believer in work from anywhere. So to your point, I live in a very small town. I think the number of animals like cows equates to the same amount as the number of people that we have gotten in town. Yeah. So it's a really small town. Yeah. Nearest airport is like an hour and a half drive. So from a technology standpoint, you would think that wouldn't be ideal. However, because I'm based in the Netherlands, we've got time zone overlap with pretty much anybody, right? So it doesn't really matter. And, we're in the digital transformation business, so, we can work from anywhere.
So working from anywhere, overlapping so many time zones, working for a 24/7 cybersecurity company, to me, a couple of things come up. One, it never stops. Your job never stops. And two, it's working and specializing in cybersecurity seems like a great way to develop a lot of paranoia about what could go wrong. So what do you do from a personal perspective to take care of the job, but also take care of yourself, knowing that your career is a marathon, not a sprint?
I mean, if you're referring to work-life balance type, if that's kind of the root of your question, I think key is to delegate, right? Don't think this is a one-man race. Don't think that you have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you have a team around you, right? And enable your team to be effective to get the job done, because work is super important, but so is the personal life. And having a good balance there is key. Also to kind of help with that paranoia on one level. The other level is the cybersecurity paranoia, which we kind of got into earlier when we spoke. That's a whole different discussion, right? Like how do you secure your home stuff with your cameras and, hey, I work for a cybersecurity company, so you can probably guess what type of tech I'm using at home.
Yeah, and what's possible. You've heard of the worst case scenario.
Yes. So that doesn't help with the paranoia, right? Because everything's connected nowadays. Is it, my EV charger on my driveway to my baby monitor to, and everything has got either a plug or a Wi-Fi like uplink. So yeah, it's having a good grasp on that is challenging, but also interesting at the same time.
You mentioned relying on your team, being in delegating. Being so important and handling the paranoia and working a 24/7 operation that's always online. What's your favorite thing about working at Zscaler?
My favorite thing is, two things actually. One is the culture. Everybody is approachable within Zscaler, and I think that's super important. I've worked for other vendors in the past, and I can say with confidence that that's not the case everywhere. So having an open and approachable culture is key. And two, I just love the technology. And I couldn't put in the hours that I do if I wouldn't fully back the technology. So yeah, I'm a strong believer in the tech.
Yeah, you said you were a nerd. So it sounds like it works pretty well. It works pretty well from that perspective. That's terrific. When an employee has a big idea, what's your advice for how they should communicate to the C-suite?
That's a great question. So I think we encourage new ideas because we are a disruptor in the market, and for us to stay that way, we need new bright ideas, and the best way to get them is from your own internal team. So we encourage great ideas. I think key to presenting it to the C-suite is taking it one step further. So what I mean by that is a lot of people have got good ideas, but that's one thing to have the idea in and of itself. The second one is, can you actually make it work? Can you commercialize? Can you productize it? And is there an addressable market for that idea? So taking it one step further to having like a high level, at least vision of, hey, this is where my idea could go. This is, the possible market we could address with it. And then we'll figure it out. We'll take it from there. But having call it a one pager of, hey, this is what I want to do. And this is my idea. This is what I think we could do with it as a company. And this is how it's going to help our customers. And that's the most and foremost important thing.
When's a time that that employee had a big idea and they presented in a way that was helpful and really resonated, and then it turned into something special for the organization?
So this was, I can name many examples, but I think one of the things that we expanded into as a company was the whole zero trust connectivity. And this was actually an idea from one of our current employees. And from the time that this person had the idea to us having a functional prototype, I think it was 4 to 6 weeks in total.
Wow, 4 to 6 weeks.
I mean, we're in cybersecurity, so you got to move quick. Yeah.
You didn't want it to get outdated, so but before the world's moving so fast, we got to take advantage of this immediately.
Yes. I mean,
wow.
This is still early days prototype, but at least we've proven that the tech has the potential. And now it's a mainstream product actually. And this is a year later.
Wow. Well, that's probably good news for your customers that you're willing to harness ideas at any level of the organization versus waiting on the C levels to have all the big ideas.
Absolutely.
Oh man. All right, so another question that comes to mind, what's one trait that you'd like to instill in every employee, and why is it important?
I think what I would encourage everybody to do is be humble. And this sounds very simple, but it's often overlooked, right? Especially if you are a technical person, it's not easy to be humble a lot of the times, because in conversations, people often think that they know best, and often they do, but hear the other person out, right? And have a humble approach of, listening and actually listen to what somebody's telling you without having some sort of opinion beforehand. So let them finish. I mean, these are very basic things, right? But they're often overlooked. And secondly, don't try to rush to a conclusion, right? Just hear the conversation out, sketch some different angles and just go from there. Be humble and be human about it. Because coming across cocky or, it's just not a good look.
I think it's one thing to be a little arrogant or have a big ego, but it's another not to listen. And I think you can have a big ego and have a lot of confidence, but not to shut off that listening piece.
Well, there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, though. So you can be very confident about what you think you know about technology, about a company. It doesn't really matter what it applies to, but there's a fine line of where you take it, and how it comes across. I mean, body language is key there, but also how you pitch a certain idea or, emotion to somebody. And people have got ways to interpret things, right? So you think you might come across confident, and the other people, the other person on the other side of the conversation feels like, well, that was kind of rude, if you want, almost. So I guess being a bit more on the humble side helps.
All right, I love it. So you have a lot of different perspectives here. One, born in Europe, working in a global company. And also the company you work for is actually based in the US.
Correct.
When you get into the different mindsets and thinking patterns of executives in the US versus Europe, what have you noticed?
I think one of the things that stands out is that in Europe, decision making is done differently, and I'll double click on that. So a lot of the times people are needing more discussions to get to a conclusion or to reach a conclusion in Europe than in the US. But in general, it depends on the vertical, right? If you're talking to governments versus commercial sector versus, pick a different vertical. So the answer varies a little bit, but in general, I think in Europe, people think longer before making a decision, which has pros and cons, right? I'm not gonna try to compare which one's better because there's no answer to that one, honestly. I think in the US, what works really well is because they move a lot quicker, especially in the cybersecurity realm, right? If you get an approval to move forward, getting there quick is often key, right? Versus in Europe, stuff takes a bit longer. The end solution is probably better in the first round because they thought about it longer. Now, does that matter? Yes or no, right? You can start off here and move here quickly, or you can start off here and you've waited 6 months longer. I mean, pros and cons.
Yeah, it's good to have an understanding of both perspectives and then also build your team with people from both groups.
Right.
And I suspect also understand what the deadline is. Get everybody working towards that.
And I gave you a very general answer on purpose because it really depends on the company and the sector and the industry that they're in. But what I'm seeing is also a difference between the type of leaders. So there's leaders that want to know the nitty-gritty themselves before they sign off, so before they feel comfortable, or there's leaders that actually rely on their teams to do all the heavy lifting, give them that one pager saying, hey, we all back this, just sign off on it. Yeah, that
build consensus. Yeah, I can see where in Europe they do a little bit better job a lot of times, probably from that perspective, and maybe take their time to think a little more about the decision. And it's great to build your team with both groups. I mean, you guys do that at Zscaler.
absolutely.
That's one of your strengths, I suspect.
It's kind of like the best of both worlds, honestly. Yeah. Within Zscaler, we encourage the teams to reach the consensus, right? Because we believe that for us, that's the best way forward.
What aspects of digital transformation are the most difficult and why?
I think digital transformation, it's on everybody's roadmap, right? If we talk to any company in the world, I will go even that far and ask them, what are your top 3 things in IT? They're going to tell you, we're going to move to the cloud, whatever that means, right? We're going to do digital transformation and we want to reduce complexity and decrease cost. Okay, sounds easy enough, right? So with digital transformation, in order to do it effective, right, we need to transform not just the network, not just the security stack, but also the applications. And all those 3 things that I mentioned before, they go hand in hand. So you can move stuff to the cloud. You can use popular terms like lift and shift. It'll get you done in terms of the checkbox exercise. You can go to your CIO and say, hey, we moved our stuff to the cloud, check. But does that give you what you are after? And I would challenge companies on that, because if we talk about digital transformation, again, you need all 3. And if we look at Zscaler as a company, for example, we're a very disruptive technology because we want to address all 3 and help companies do that. So to go back to your question, what's the most challenging about it? It's changing the mindsets and it's changing the way how organizations deal with IT effectively. Because typically you have your silos where you have your network team, your security team, your application team, And it was very simple, right? The network team owns the policy, or they own the connectivity from A to B. You know, if I'm on VPN, I'm in some IP pool, I talk to some IP pool over here, and that's what they own. They make the connectivity. We got the security team, they own the firewall and the policy in between. And then the app team obviously maintain the applications. What we're saying now is, well, the application could be anywhere. And like there is no VPN, there is no like network, because one of the architectural principles is, you know, get the user off the network. So the network team is like, okay, so they're still connected somehow, so I guess we should own that piece. Then the security team now has to create policies saying, well, Dan belonging to these groups has access to these applications instead of IPs, right? So it's really a change in mindset, and then the question becomes, who owns that? So a big part of what we do is coaching companies to go into that new mindset. We've got good examples where companies have made like zero trust center of excellence groups within their teams, where they have stakeholders from all those silos participate and have like an overarching team to deal with the policy.
Yeah, it's so funny because you asked that question about digital transformation. You think it's going to be about technology. You're like, Ben, we've got the technology. It's the thinking about the technology that's the challenge, and that's where you guys spend a lot of time helping the people really adapt their mindsets and wrap their mind around it. That sounds like a real key to success.
Exactly, and it's you know, you're going into these companies, and I came from a Zscaler customer, right? So I kind of know the impact it can have, right, when you're on the receiving end of this conversation. But like you go in and you say, well, you know, we're going to do an architecture workshop. We're going to draw out what this, you know, could look like for you as a company, and people will go like, well, this is great, but I've been in networking for like 25 years. Now you tell me that I got to do stuff differently? Yeah. I mean, it's not going to mean that, you know, you'll be out of a job. No, like we'll free up your time to do the cool stuff that you can't do now because you're putting out fires, right?
Yeah, Zscaler has a very unique leadership role in helping people make that mental shift, because it's a big change for them.
Right.
And I love the fact that it's real. I think it's so important that y'all are putting so much emphasis on that. Now, sort of advancing the conversation a little bit, you cannot open the newspaper without, or open a web browser without seeing something about artificial intelligence. And there's a lot coming down there and it's moving fast. What most excites you about what's coming with AI and what's going on, and what are your biggest concerns there?
I think what excites me most about AI, and then going back to Zscaler, for example, because we're now in line for the majority of your data, we've got a rich set of data to work with. So, because everybody uses the buzzword AI ML. I mean, last year it was Edge and 5G, now it's AI ML. Yes, there's a lot happening in that market and that people need to tap into, but your AI model is only as good as the data that you feed into it. And I think that's very unique, that within Zscaler, that we're sitting on rich data. Like we see everything that traverses our exchange to be able to then make very cool and meaningful decisions for you. And this can be from anything from just insights, giving you visibility, giving you a comparison, like this is how your company is doing versus others in the industry, doing some analysis on your data. But the biggest one, I think, is behavior analysis. So dynamic risk, right? Mm-hmm. Is it, because everything that happens needs to be continuously assessed. So is it me using my phone, checking in to my flight back to Amsterdam? Maybe I'm half asleep, I click on a phishing link, right? So my risk score changes, right? So using AI, we can now give you the tools to make meaningful policy decisions, because back in the day it was allow or block. You can block me, I'll probably call the help desk and not have a great day, right? It's like, I can't work anymore. Well, Dan, you know, you did a stupid thing, so tough, we need to remediate your endpoint, all that stuff. That really doesn't fly anymore nowadays, in my opinion. So now, with that, we can now send you to isolation, for example. So we spin up a workload in the cloud for you, and we only send the pixels to your endpoint. So you're basically in like a sandbox, effectively, right? So you can still do your work, but you're very limited in what you can do within that session. Or we can send you to deception. where effectively we're saying, you're not talking to an actual website, you're talking to a decoy or lure that is in our environment. So the SOC can actually start to reverse engineer some of that stuff. So this is all driven by AI. And the same on the workload side. So if I have endpoints, let's say I've got a IP camera, right? Typically that's talking to like an NVR for data storage, but now all of a sudden it's sending traffic to a file sharing website. That's probably not okay, right? So to give you the split-second decision-making capability driven by AI to do something about it, I think is key. And this is also taps into some of the concerns.
What's the biggest risk? Yeah, what's the most concerning thing that comes to mind right now when it comes to AI?
It's really the lack of knowledge around the impact it could have. I'll give an example. People uploading source code to an AI to make sure that their code is efficient. That's great in essence, right? But are you aware where that AI lives and where that data is processed and where that's potentially getting exposed to? Maybe, maybe not.
So
right?
we have met the enemy, and it is us. It's what we're feeding into AI, and I understand that they want to check code, but yeah, you just put your code into a black box machine on the internet. You don't know where it went.
So this is a big area for us where we invest heavily in, is helping companies adapt AI properly, and also you can use our platform to secure that, right?
So now speaking to the leaders out there that are inside organizations and they're like, man, this is out of control. It's moving, AI is moving fast. Cybersecurity risk, I don't even know what my risks are. What's the first step that you'd recommend that they take?
I would say start simple. And with that, I mean, get the user off the network. And this sounds simple enough, right? It's effectively install an agent and make sure that the user is no longer connected to the network. It shouldn't matter if I'm connected to Wi-Fi here in Las Vegas, or if I'm at home, or if I'm actually in the corporate office. Because my opinion is that a user can do more damage when they're in the office, when they're actually on the network, than when they're working from home. But a lot of companies come from a situation where they had to rush into a solution due to the global pandemic for people to work at home, didn't really have proper security controls in place, and now people come back to the office, right? So now you got this endpoint that's been kind of out there for a couple of years, coming back to the office, you don't really know what's going to happen, right? So the philosophy is get the user off the network, because then even though when they come back to the network, that's still like guest Wi-Fi, right? Nothing really changes. So we really believe in like an internet cafe type model, where especially when you're in the office, it's just internet, right? Your first hop is always your security enforcement point, which is Zscaler.
Dan, so what's your advice for leaders?
It's really to start simple, like crawl, walk, run. Everybody has an end goal in mind where they want to get to, but this is where you are today. Let's define these milestones. Let's address the low-hanging fruit, and then let's get there as a team.
What advice would you give your younger self?
It's really to dream big. It's sky's the limit. It sounds very cliche, but it truly is. And I think I'm a good example of that, right? I started out doing lighting, and I went to a service desk, and now I'm a CTO for a company. So I think dream big is key.
What's the one trait that you'd like to instill in every employee, and why is it important?
It's to be humble. Like, you don't want to come across as arrogant. Confident is fine, just not arrogant. And listen to what the other person has to say, and be humble about it.
So Dan, what aspects of digital transformation are the most difficult, and why?
So I think it's not just a technology problem, it's really a mindset challenge, right? We're going in, and this is a very disruptive technology that we're pitching. And this is only as good as, so the tech is only as good as the adoption rate, right? And this is what gets me, this is where we need to help people, because we're telling them to do things vastly different than what they've been doing for 10, 20, 30 years. And if we don't help them get there, they're not going to adopt the tech. I can sell you a platform all day long. If you're not going to adopt it, it's not going to work for you. It's not going to do anything. So this is where we focus a lot on, is helping people adopt it and helping them show the new way of doing things.
Leaders out there know they need cybersecurity. There are a lot of companies that they could go with. Why should they go with Zscaler?
With Zscaler, we believe in the platform approach. So we do many things in cybersecurity, right? It's not just your URL filtering, it's not just VPN replacement, it's a true platform. And I think that's what really sets us apart and what helps organizations down the line. Like we discussed earlier, AI and data. Like the only way for us to be effective is to see your data. So having a platform approach in place is really helpful for customers.
What do you say to leaders who don't have a plan for cybersecurity?
I start off with a very simple question, is how much do you care about being online? How much does it cost for you to not be online? And then we build from there. That's actually a very good question. I had a new CISO who joined the company. I asked her the question. It's like, oh, we need 5 nines availability. I said, really? Like, how do you know? Because that question goes both ways, right? And she was like, well, that's what my predecessor did. So I encouraged her to go to the board and ask them the same question. How much downtime is acceptable for us? And the answer was really shocking, because they were like, a couple of days is fine. So it goes both ways. So she was like, I'm designing a 5 nines type system here, but my board is okay being down for a couple of days, right? So it's also finding the balance there.
That's interesting.
I mean, and this applies to many things. Cybersecurity is not really one of them, because in those 2 days, even if the 2 days are acceptable, if your data is exfiltrated, you kind of have an issue, right? So cybersecurity is an always-on type of game.
So Dan, I've been hearing this term lift and shift. What is it and why is it a problem?
So lift and shift is where you basically take your current on-prem real estate, basically put it on a truck, send it to the cloud. So this way you're not utilizing any of the innovation that these hyperscalers offer, right? So you're basically taking your on-prem servers, sticking them in the cloud one-to-one. Now, if we talk about digital transformation, that's not what we're after. Because also some of the cost savings that people hope to get in the cloud, you're not going to see, because basically you've taken whatever was there and replicated it in the cloud. So ties into digital transformation, like it's network, security, and application. Use the cloud native functions, and then also the cloud native security on top. That's when it starts making sense.
So Dan, one day when you leave Zscaler, what do you hope your leadership legacy will be?
A safer world.
Dan, thanks for coming on CXO Revolutionary.
Thanks very much for having me.